The views expressed on this show by guests and the host on issues outside of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence are the opinions of those individuals alone and do not necessarily reflect those of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I am the host, Andy Steele, and tonight is one that I have been looking forward to for a long time. This is a good friend of mine that we're going to be interviewing tonight, and she is a great example of somebody who just on her own decides that she's going to do something, creates an excellent podcast, video podcast on YouTube, interviewing various people in the 9/11 Truth movement, and she's done some other things as well. So let's go ahead and introduce her. Her name is Julia Picicci. She's a 9/11 activist, and on her own several years ago created an excellent YouTube podcast called Unthinkable. It's just like this show. It focuses on September 11th with a heavy focus on the World Trade Center controlled demolitions. She's also now a volunteer with AE 9/11 Truth, and she provided that excellent voiceover for our latest rises for Project Due Diligence, advertising that, and we're going to be using her services even more here in the future. And she's a nurse as well. And we're going to be learning a lot more about this person today. Let's go ahead and bring Julia. Welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Thank you, Andy. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for your very generous introduction.
Well, I want the audience to get to know you more because, again, there's a lot of people who work in groups and things like that, but just on your own, without even having been in the 9/11 Truth movement very long, you decided to create this video podcast. And I was actually watching this years ago, so I knew who you were before we started talking. And you do some great work. You have an excellent video. It's right there up on the homepage of the YouTube channel that sort of introduces that. Great video editing. I'd like to know where you got those crisp and clear shots of Building 7 going down, by the way. We need to talk about that. Because like all the archival footage is like all, degraded and because it's so old, but somehow you manage that and just really well put together, really well done. You got a great voice for that. So the 9/11 Truth movement, our supporters here at AE 9/11 Truth need to get to know you more. Start off by elaborating on that background that I just shared. Tell us more about yourself previous to waking up to 9/11.
Oh, gosh. Well, I was 13 when I kind of initially discovered 9/11 being something other than what the mainstream media had to say. So that wasn't very exciting prior to that. But in the years following, I remember it must have been 2012 when I saw the AE video expert speak out. Remember, I was a nurse working nights in the ICU, and it was one of my off nights when I had to stay up in the middle of the night, like you can't mess up your sleep schedule. And it was on Netflix. I swear it was on Netflix because that was the only thing I had. And so I watched this documentary alone around 2, 3 in the morning. And I remember being really stirred. I mean, shocked, disturbed, floored. I remember after it was over, I just sat in silence in my living room for like 5 minutes. I was so overwhelmed by what I had seen. But as I alluded to earlier, I'd kind of already known on some level that something really wasn't right. But then I just went about my life. And then in 2020, I kind of got to a place in my own life where I saw that certain things were happening in the movement and enough research had really been done and other people were starting to step up. Obviously, I was aware of AE 9/11 Truth for, I guess, 8 years at that point. But when I realized what had been done with Dr. Halsey's study, I felt like, okay, things are more solidified. And I felt a need that maybe I wanted to get involved. I had enough like passion, anger that I thought I could carry into something realistic. But I had no connection with anyone in the truth movement. I didn't even really understand what it was. And so I naively went at it on my own on Facebook and YouTube, I guess. I met a lot of people in a very short period of time. Um, it wasn't much, but I'd like to believe that there was quality there. I mean, I certainly poured my heart and soul and what I understand about 9/11 into my work. And I can truly say that none of it would have been enabled without the work of AE, because that's really where everything that my gut was telling me for years aligned with the facts that real scientists could affirm, and in Dr. Halsey's case, prove that 9/11 at the World Trade Center, there's no other way to truthfully describe it other than a series of controlled and explosive demolitions.
Yeah, as your video says, those buildings were blown up, and that is the most basic way to say it. Of course, we've got a whole lot of science to back up that statement, but it can be summed up in just those words. Those buildings were blown up. So tell us about the day of 9/11. It's interesting that you're so young. You were 13 on that day. Talk about the experience of finding out what happened.
Oh, gosh. I want to say I was in like fourth period. I was a freshman in high school up in Oyster Bay, New York. And I remember we started to have all these loudspeaker announcements calling students to the office. And then there was some talk that something had happened in the city. And there was a little bit of worry and confusion. And then they turned on the TVs. And for the rest of the day, I mean, we went about our periods, but the TVs were all that we did. And everyone was just in shock. Many of my classmates' parents were working in the city, and that's what a lot of the calls were about, people trying to get in touch with their kids saying, I'm okay, or at least in one case, that they weren't okay. So it was a very emotional day, but I have kind of like a flashbulb memory, as they say in psychology, like something so emotionally intense kind of burns itself in your brain. I'm sitting there and I can remember the exact angle where I was seeing the TV, and it was the first time I saw the tower collapse, obviously the South Tower in this case, coming down first. And I was just in disbelief, because having been there and learned a little bit about the Twin Towers from my father, just from we went for a visit one day, it just seemed so unthinkable, I guess. It was absolutely unthinkable to me that building could have come down that quickly in that manner, knowing what a robust building it was. And yeah, I was 13. What did I know? But I knew enough. I was on the top of that building once. So at that moment, something shifted within me where I was thinking, well, there's no way it was just because of the plane, or it was not just because of the fire. I'm going to listen to the news and they're going to talk about bombs going off. And so that's what I did after then. I mean, believe it or not, I was not a humongous consumer of corporate media, at that age. And I just started watching everything I could, trying to hear for them to talk about explosions and bombs, because that's what I saw. And I thought the only way that the building could have come down is if they had put bombs in there. And I kept watching and watching, and I was confused for a long time about it. And it bothered me. You know, I was very fortunate. I didn't lose anybody. I knew a few people who like worked there and had literally run for their lives. And I remember the smell of that day just being so close, you know, in New York. I mean, there was like a smell that hung over the town for like 4 days.
That's interesting you say that, because I had a professor. I was down at USF in Tampa, but a professor who had gone down there in the immediate aftermath, and he described a smell that you can't even really identify what it is. It just hung in the air. So there you are, backing up that claim. And of course, I didn't go down there till December, so probably a lot of that lifted by that time. And it's so funny you talk about the flashbulb memory. I can remember seeing the towers come down, and you would think I had some kind of profound thought during that, but all I just remember is seeing it, and I can't remember a darn thing that I thought as it happened. It just seemed like it was happening in another world. And you instinctively, as a kid, knew there was something wrong with the story. That puts you ahead of so many other people who just instantly swallowed the official story, believed in, you know, the progressive collapse theory, whatever they were telling us in the early days. And you didn't really let that go moving forward. You talked about it a little bit, but tell me a little bit more about sort of having that initial instinct validated by watching experts speak out. Did this affect your worldview in any way when you saw this?
Oh my gosh. How did it not affect my worldview? As I mentioned earlier, I sat there motionless, speechless for 5 or so minutes. And I remember it felt like something was collapsing within me. Like I had this belief about the world. And I mean, I should say this. I had my initial 9/11 understanding that the buildings couldn't come down, but over time, you know, going to school, being busy with life, like I didn't want to think about that every day. But when I found ESO on Netflix, I was like, how am I supposed to go to work tomorrow and like make a sandwich after understanding how deeply true my initial suspicions were? Like, and it seemed completely incomprehensible to me that everyone in the country who had even remotely heard about this was not jumping up and down, losing their minds with outrage. Like, this seemed to me so unbelievable, but unfortunately extremely believable, as you understand and learn through the Experts Speak Out documentary, that there's no way it could have happened other than controlled demolition. But yes, it completely destroyed my worldview in a way. And it was almost like that cognitive dissonance, like you're on the fulcrum point, about to tip in one direction, but it's like you're about to like leap off a cliff into all this unknown and uncertainty and insecurity. It deeply affected me. But yet I still didn't feel comfortable talking to my friends or family about it. I mean, maybe my deepest, like maybe 2 people in the world at that time knew like that I was concerned about this issue. But I was also very afraid of what people would think about me, or they would ridicule me or say I was crazy, something like that, or that I was unpatriotic, or, you know, a variety of concerns, which maybe were well-founded, honestly, looking back.
Well, that was typically the lines that were thrown at people in the truth movement early on. I remember that. You know, un-American, how dare you? It's disrespectful to the victims and their families, even though basically the whole thing was started by 9/11 family members. The Jersey widows got the whole train rolling on this thing. And so, I mean, a lot of people stayed in the shadows as a result of this public peer pressure generated by corporate media. I mean, Fox News was eager to attack anybody that said this, that talked about these issues. But it wasn't just Fox News. It was all the other ones as well. And even History Channel put out a 2-hour documentary supposedly debunking us while putting on a bunch of crazy stuff afterwards, like for 12 hours of insanity. That's their programming now, but they're supposedly the authority.
Channel. Let's not do that.
History is not history. History is not history. But anyway, but that's what was going out there. But eventually you decided to step out, to put yourself out there, have your podcasts. And again, it's not even like when a lot of people started, even this show started as an audio show, and you heard my voice, but you didn't see me, but you were right out there on video from the very beginning. What made you take that leap from being kind of afraid of coming out and then being out there, out front?
I think it took time, and I had to mature a little bit, understand my place in the world. And after thinking about it for many years, and the 20th anniversary was approaching, I felt like maybe I wanted to see, maybe is there enough going on that just needs a little bit more of a voice in, the vacuum of the internet. And the jumping off point was when I had a chance to fully sit down and digest the Halsey report and what he was saying. And then I saw that there was a firefighter out of Long Island in an area I was familiar with who had put forth a resolution through his fire district. That really, for me, that hit home, literally, physically, because it was so close to some areas I spent a lot of time in as a kid. And that inspired me, as a nurse, we kind of think of other first responders. I mean, we're not really first, but second, other caregivers as our brethren in some ways. And it takes a lot to put aside what, other people might want to say about you if you were to speak out about something like that. And so that was inspiring to me. But then on its face, I remember taking a good look at what AE had been putting out. And I just thought, maybe if I tried to do something before the 20th anniversary, even if I don't make significant impact, it could just raise awareness a little bit more. And I knew I wanted it to be kind of like a one-word thing, and I wanted there to be a design that went with it. And that took a very long time. But as soon as the unthinkable kind of dawned on me, it just seemed to kind of take a life of its own. And then I just wanted to kind of give voice to some people who, had done some things and been involved in the movement, so they would have an opportunity to just speak out more, where it always feels like it's hard to get this information out there, and there may be not necessarily not enough of an audience. But is it algorithms? Is it, I don't know, just wanted to give them an opportunity to share their experience and get a little behind the scenes from some folks who had done real stuff in the movement that I found to be very valuable.
Right. There are so many unsung heroes out there who have done a lot in the movement, but they're not like the quote big names, out there. And honestly, because that was sort of the motivation for this show in the beginning back in 2012 too. Let's hear from the volunteers at AE 9/11 Truth and hear about all the great projects that they're doing behind the scenes, all of that. And they need to be spotlighted, if for no other reason, to have a historical record. So 40 years from now, if future generations are saying, why didn't more people speak out about this? You can point to it and say, nope, they did a lot of stuff. I mean, everything, including the kitchen sink, has been thrown at this issue practically over the years. And it's great that you're interviewing those voices out there who have done something. anything. And you know, a lot of times it's not like some big bells and whistles fireworks display that makes the most difference. It's the small things that are done well every single day by a group of people that you may not even hear about. And we got to share their stories as well. So, and I've seen the Unthinkable logo, and what's so great about it is it's something that I can see taking off. It's something that I can see sticking in people's minds. It's a great name. It's a great logo. You have a t-shirt, I know, that has it on it.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to get me one too.
Okay.
But and maybe I'll start wearing it on the show. I always wear these button-up shirts, but maybe we need to start focusing more on you know, groups and things like that. But I'm just curious. I mean, you kind of relayed this a little bit, but why so much of the focus on the World Trade Center evidence when there's other things about 9/11 that people talk about, but you've zeroed in on that? Why?
I think it's multifactorial. So, first of all, the personal connection for me was always the Twin Towers. For example, I didn't even know about Building 7 until later on. I was not someone who came to that probably until I saw experts speak out. I think as a naturally caretaking person, someone who is focused on relieving the suffering of other people, as I just grew in, you know, my post high school, you know, college career and professional career, I found what happened at the Twin Towers to be the most prevalent and the most, how do I say, like, it was the most in your face example of humans suffering needlessly in this situation that also was backed up by the most scientific evidence that I myself could understand, having like studied physics in college and all that stuff. It was what felt accessible to me, but also I felt, I hate to use this term, but almost like called to speak out about it. Obviously, what happened with World Trade Center Building 7 is extremely important, and not at all to diminish, you know, the tremendous loss of life in other areas of 9/11 in Pennsylvania and in Washington, D.C. But that, I don't know how else to explain it other than that just naturally didn't come to me as my inspired focus. Just like, you know, if you're going to be a writer, they say, like, well, write about what you know. And in this case, the World Trade Center, especially the Twin Towers, was what I felt like I at least maybe not knew, but understood. And the robustness of research and data about what happened there is tremendous. And, you know, obviously that's been advanced significantly by AE. I was never able to let it go. It disturbed me on a different level than the other facets of the nationwide tragedy that we had. And not just for the people inside the buildings, but the people who were trying to rescue people. And the more than 10,000 people who have died from 9/11 related illness, which is a whole other, we could talk about that for probably a whole other hour.
Well, you know, I want to, and I'm trying to so much. First of all, thank God you didn't let it go. And thank God so many people who are watching this video right now never let it go. I mean, our entire movement is based on people who won't let it go. And it's something that happened 20 years ago, but it still affects lives. It still affects the nation. And, of course, the people who got sick from the toxins around Ground Zero. I've been saying this for years. Those people didn't get sick because airplanes ran into buildings. They got sick because the towers came down, which is directly relevant to our issue here at AE 9/11 Truth. So for them, this is completely relevant topic, and they deserve to know why they are sick. Why did these buildings come down? So even though we're continuing on this mission, we're continuing to talk about this, we have naysayers out there not even the people who are violently opposed to what we're doing, but the people who are, sort of on the sidelines in the middle saying, well, yeah, you got a point, but what you gonna do about it? It's just so big. It's so, set in history right now. 20 years ago, what can I do? Why is that even still important anymore? I typically ask this at the end of the show, but I'm going to ask you right now. After, what are we, 22 years now? 22 years after the event, why is this still important to you?
I mean, just because the time has passed doesn't change what happened that day. On the contrary, like, we have seen how many political and social changes have happened since then. It absolutely blows my mind that more American people don't care, or don't seem to care to want to understand what happened during the worst disaster on American soil, at the very least during their lifetime, if not ever. I mean, wouldn't you want to know if it was very likely that two of the most iconic buildings in the world were literally blown up with thousands of people inside? Like, I don't know how else to explain it. Like, I don't know how to say that we should care about these things, but I think we should care about these things. And this is, I mean, it doesn't matter how long it's been. I mean, now we have more research than ever. I mean, we have more proof that there's literally no way that what they, like the official government narrative of 9/11 in New York it couldn't have happened. There's all this engineering data, there's seismic data, there's microscopic dust data. And also, if you just look at the video, they brought down the tallest buildings in the world in about 10 seconds each. Are you kidding me? Like, it still blows my mind, and I think I have a lot of passion for it, just like intrinsically. And so it's a hard question for me to answer. Why is it still important? Because my answer is kind of like, how is this not important? If that makes sense.
Well, yeah, say that to somebody who lost their child. And, just putting aside 9/11, there are cold case murders that happened from 30 years ago. And let's say somebody was 18, they were found dead on the side of the road somewhere. It never got solved. I mean, there are parents of these people in their 80s who are still actively calling the police every week, seeing if there's any new leads, wanting to get some kind of final answer on what happened to their loved one. And we praise that typically, but when it comes to 9/11, there seems to be this fear, this cognitive dissonance. People just want it to go away. Less and less I've seen over the years. I think a lot more people are open to it now. But a murder is a murder, regardless of whether or not there is a political agenda attached to it. And so we owe it to those people who did nothing but other than go to work on that day. That's all they did. They went to work and they were killed. And the explanation that we've been given by NIST, it doesn't make any sense. You can see that on its face. And to me, the case for controlled demolition was made 10 years ago. I mean, we keep on getting new stuff too, but the case was made to at least justify a new investigation, but we run into challenges. Now, I've been around for a long time and I could talk about this, but I want to hear from your perspective, just from what you witness out there in the world through doing activism, through engaging people on Unthinkable, or just in real space. What are the biggest challenges that you've seen and faced in trying to get the message out about what really happened to those buildings?
I would say there's several levels of it. On one level, there's like the initial prejudice that many people have. If it's brought up like, wasn't that a conspiracy theory? And then they kind of just want to, dismiss it without making any kind of investigation. I think some folks I've tried to raise the topic with are afraid of how it might affect them professionally. I went to Binghamton University for my BS and my my bachelor in nursing, and there was also an engineering school there. So I made friends with people who would eventually become engineers, and it's incredible how quiet the conversation goes when the topic is brought up. Even with like a heartfelt appeal, there's so many barriers that I don't even understand. But then I think another issue is dealing with folks who are very familiar with 9/11. Many folks I encountered online have like their own specific focus, or maybe like everyone thinks something is, more important than the other thing. So I found it very hard to organize anything within the truth movement, or sometimes finding civil dialogue was difficult. and that's why I kind of just try to stick with things that can be, at least are in theory like provable, and not get into a lot of the weeds of other issues and opinions and speculation. But the barriers, it almost feels like they're built into our society in a way. It's incredibly difficult to get any visibility for this topic. I would say that's the number one barrier, that there's an incredible amount of prejudice or bias against it that, in my opinion, seems scientifically unwarranted. It seems like kind of like a learned behavior, or we've been taught over time, conditioned so long to just accept what you were told about 9/11. Otherwise, you're weird, or you're a conspiracy theorist, or you're crazy, or whatever. But if you just look at the facts, they're not, it's not out of the realm of like relevant, intelligent social discourse. So
no, you're absolutely right.
It feels like there are like invisible walls, kind of like trying to keep the information from getting out. And then if you can even reach people, there are barriers too.
I'm going to tell you, from what I've witnessed in society, even myself, pre 9/11, I remember there was this kid at USF. He was missing a leg for whatever reason. I can remember that. But he would talk about things about society, things that I absolutely agree with now at 43. But at the time, whenever he would talk about this, he would get sort of that moniker of being a conspiracy theorist. And even I would be kind of exchanging glances with people and kind of smirking at it. I think we're trained to do that by certain just prejudices that are put on into us by television, ways that certain people are portrayed. And of course, they attacked anybody that talked about this when it really first started getting steam over the years. And honestly, I think the society is such right now that you could, like, for instance, we'll just take entertainment. You could take one joke, and people, if they hear their friends say it and deliver it perfectly, they wouldn't find it maybe that funny, but if it's on television and they're in a group, they'll find it hysterical. People are very community and socially centered, and TV gives them that permission to think something. So that's why we've done so much of trying to break into these mediums that a lot of people see. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there poisoning the well with crazy stuff, so they want, and then the other side wants to try to associate us with that as much as they can, even though it has nothing to do with us. We're not the ones saying that stuff.
Right.
So in terms of like the censorship and, what we see from the media, and right now it's gone from attacks to just pretending this issue doesn't exist except at the anniversary time every year. What are some tactics that you've seen and that you think we should be doing better in the movement to get the message out and sort of circumvent that?
Ooh, that's a really good question, and a very difficult one, because I think if I knew the answers to that, like maybe more people would know. Well, I guess I can speak about my experience with the censorship, just in trying to get information out, whether on Facebook or YouTube. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to even find 9/11 truth information on YouTube, you have to change your filter settings. So get rid of relevance and then just go to like newest or view count, etc. It's one of the only ways to get around it. I honestly don't know the answer to your question, but I can only speak about what I've done. I had raised money for Unthinkable on like a very small scale to try to experiment with like Facebook advertising. I did that for a little while, and I used that video you spoke about just to try to get out and see what would they let me do. And with a little bit of money, I reached like tens of thousands of people, and most of them did not freak out about the video. And it really didn't cost a lot of money at all, but that was kind of like my experiment. I think the biggest barrier, I would say, to overcoming the censorship and the obstacles is funding, because you really can't get stuff done in this world without that. And unfortunately, that can be hard because it being, a couple decades ago, people may not be as inspired. But I mean, if you can find ways that people can participate in projects that are deeply meaningful to them, like the Project Due Diligence thing. I mean, I think that's great. That's why I wanted to help with that in a small way. I think if you can get people to be invested and have backing, there are ways you can multiply even small amounts of resources to try to make an impact. And then, of course, trying things on a grassroots level is probably the hardest way. And I mean, I don't have a long resume of street activism, but you do reach people that way, but not as many as you can through, the venues we have today through technology. But I wish I had a better answer. And when you figure that out, you let me know.
Yeah, when I figure it out too, because it is very difficult, and that's why we're always fundraising, why we're always going to the supporters with new projects, new ways to try to break this into the mainstream, or at least just try to slide it in and get somebody out there in the beast, whether it's the government or media, to do something with this and hold them to account. That's why we always did the the court cases and things like that, because like you got to try, otherwise what are we here for? And then there's a historical record too that can be accumulated, but you never know. Every once in a while, something happens. Maybe you're that kid throwing the rock at the tank, but maybe that rock gets caught up in some mechanism on that tank, and the whole thing just upends and falls over, and it's like David and Goliath. But don't forget who won in that story. In the end. So you got to always try everything, every new angle that you can possibly think of within reason, and go for it, because the way the world is structured right now, these social media platforms, digital stuff is where it's at. And so I want to inspire everybody out there. If you want to create a YouTube channel, or if you is on some other platform like BitChute or something like that, go ahead and do that. There's so many people flooding YouTube with just irrelevant nonsense. All right. Like reaction videos. I'm going to watch a scene from a TV show, and you're going to see a box of me here going like to it. Like, I mean, just absolutely ridiculous stuff that adds nothing to the culture. Let's take it back. Let's flood the airwaves again with information about this important topic, September 11th, and the fact that we still haven't gotten justice on this issue even after 20 years. But I can wait them out. I can wait them out and continue to do this. And I know you can too, because we're dedicated. Now, you talked about the Project Due Diligence video, and I want you to talk about the process of doing that voiceover, because honestly, I'm just telling you the truth. You got the best voice for that of all the people that I know. And why is Project Due Diligence going to the branches of ASCE and all these other professional institutions? Why is this such an important focus for AE 9/11 Truth right now, from your point of view?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that the foundational idea of Project Due Diligence is excellent in theory, and it's already, rolled out for quite a while. So there is such a humongous opportunity, as we briefly mentioned earlier, for people to try to shy away from a subject because of fear of like professional repercussion. But I think by AE going and reaching out to these chapters and finding ones that are willing to have the presentations and then actually going through that process, in my opinion, it's probably the most valuable grassroots activism that could take place today. I don't know how else we're actually going to wake up people that can deeply understand the topic enough to make a significant impact by speaking out, other than by pursuing this type of grassroots campaign. That being said, you asked what my experience was like doing that voiceover. It was extremely humbling, honestly, because I do believe in the project. Obviously, I'm not an architect or engineer. I mean, I understand a lot of the things that are talked about on your podcast and through the literature, but I mean, I couldn't do half of what I couldn't do an iota of what the architects and engineers are actually doing by putting themselves out there in the world to present to these other chapters. I mean, I felt very humbled to be able to participate, and I hope that my passion for the project came through, being able to read that for everybody.
Well, you did a great job, and it's more than just reading a script. You got to put some energy and some drama into it. There's so many people who might just kind of coldly just read it line by line, like they're doing a book report in school or something. But you've got that energy, you've got that passion to put into this, and I think it's really conveyed through your words on that video.
Thank you.
So I think that, I still believe something is going to happen with this. And that's, again, just to backtrack, that's why Project Due Diligence is so important, because we're actually reaching the heart of the 9/11 issue. So many people always think about government and, think about the romantic conspiratorial aspects of this. But at the very heart is the engineering profession. Those are the people who probably didn't think that they'd be at the center of a controversy like this when they signed up for that profession. Typically, engineers go and do a job and go home, and they let all the people talking about controversial subjects do that on television. But here they are. Their profession is at the heart of this, because we're talking about what happened to those buildings on that day. And we got to reach them. And it's where the truth still matters, like you said in that video. They still do care about the truth. And I will tell the audience this, is that I've been doing a lot of calling and trying to get these presentations scheduled. And at some point, in the last 6 months or so, I'm calling people. And a lot of times these engineers who are presidents of branches will say, yeah, I'm aware of this. It's horrible. And it's horrible that we're not talking about that. And we'll get the presentation scheduled, and then somebody from above will step in. So it's kind of hit or miss, like 50-50. It might go all the way to the end, and then the other half of the time somebody will step in and try to stop it. But a lot of these people at the grassroots of the engineering community are aware of this topic, and they basically agree with us on it, at least on the need for a new investigation. So some of these organizations are trying to stifle this fire from spreading, talking about this topic. But that's why we have our people going around different parts of the country, sometimes traveling up to like 200 miles. We had one guy drive across several states just to do this presentation.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of dedication that's put in by these engineers, and they're not getting any kind of reward for it or anything, just to give this presentation and host this dialogue. So it is having an impact. We are planting the seeds in the minds of the engineering profession, and that's why everybody needs to get behind this. It's not something that's deep and dark and shadowy. and exciting in that aspect, but it's actually going out and doing everything out in the light of day, having this grassroots organizing and these presentations going on right out front, and you will get at the heart of these organizations, and we may even influence them in the very end. I want to know from you, though. See, I have this vision. It's in my mind. It's like a newspaper headline, and it just says, towers brought down in controlled demolition, Congress says. I believe that can happen. I'm not that cynical yet. Imagine that happens day after 9/11 truth. What takes place? What kind of impact will that have on our world?
I mean, I think people would lose their minds. I think it would be, if it really hit in such a massive scale, where there was finally some admission or something that came out that just, their hands were tied. I think everyone would probably be feeling a lot worse than what I felt on my couch in 2012 at 3 a.m. after watching experts speak out. I think it would just be like a catastrophic shift and loss of security for the country, and I mean even throughout the world. I think I don't know how people will react, but I don't think it would be very well. And even then, I bet there would still be a call of, why didn't more people say this sooner? And it's just because people literally don't know. I think that there probably are a lot of people in the country that have never heard of Building 7, have no idea that this is a thing. And while I obviously wish that headline would come out as well, and that we would begin to go down a path of justice for this issue. I don't want to say fear, but I still fear what other kind of unintended consequences could come back, because it is such a deep, traumatizing issue for our country, for the world. I don't know how people would react.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm an eternal optimist. And this is what I think personally. I think like that enough people have heard about this that they know it's like out there, it's like an issue, right? And so I think enough people have heard about it that they would be braced for it. And I personally believe the country would be better off in the long run. Yes, there'd be an initial shock, and then there would be certain people that would be, have been defending this official story that might be personally hurt by it. But we've had so many terrible things happen in this country in the past. And move forward from it. We celebrate the people who did the right thing at that time, and we become a stronger country, and we become even more patriotic, because it's the government doesn't represent the people represent the people. This is an example of the people doing something, righting or wrong. I think we'd be a stronger nation as a result. I think we'd have more patriotism in the next 10 years following that revelation, and we got to believe that it will happen. There's so many negative Nancys out there who want to just sit in the bleachers and throw stones and say, oh, it'll never happen. Well, the first step to succeeding at anything is visualizing it happening. If you want to get in shape, you got to visualize yourself being that person. You want to succeed in a certain career, you got to visualize yourself getting to wherever you want in that career and getting there. Because if you don't have that visualization in your mind, then you're not going to get there. You got to believe that something can happen, and that we can get to that day. And I love to think about that day after 9/11 truth. And man, we'll do one more episode of Free Fall. All the great people. Well, it'll look like the Brady Bunch here on the screen with all the great people who've been on here. We'll reflect on it, and then we'll turn it off, and nobody will have to hear from me again. And I think it can happen. I really do, if we really believe that we want to, and we just keep on doing all of those small things done well every day, that we have been doing for the years, and not lose our energy and not lose our hope. Well, what are some of the small things, and you may have alluded on this earlier, but just refresh us, some of the small things that people can do every day to bring us to that day we just described?
I mean, sometimes sometimes it's just about sharing something, you know, like free fall or whatever. Um, like like Dr. Halsey's free fall, I thought that that was so valuable. And I could think of so many people that I knew whose minds might be opened by hearing that. Sometimes that might be all we can do. But I mean, like contributing to an organization who's actually doing work, like architects and engineers, is something that, I mean, you don't have to give money every day, but you know, it helps if it's consistent. I don't know. I mean, I wish there was more of an opportunity for grassroots, like in the rest of the world, like for people's daily lives, but sometimes that's just not possible. I think, as you mentioned earlier, I think you're right that, you know, social media and the online presence is probably the future of being able to spread the message and increase awareness. So that's probably the best and easiest thing to do, just to try to share what you can so more people can gain awareness of that.
So what I want to ask, and I ask this a lot of people, is again, 22 years afterwards, we've lost some people over the years, we've gained some people, and for the people who have been in this since, I don't know, the early days of 9/11 Truth, I don't know if there's an exact start date, but I guess 9/12 or 9/11.
I was just going to say 9/12.
For some people, something keeps them going. Something keeps them going here 22 years later, despite whatever, you know, what the people out there say from the bleachers, despite any trouble they run into getting the message out. There's something that keeps that motor running. I want to know what it is for you.
Yeah. And it always comes back to this for me. It's for, you know, the incredible tragedy of what happened in New York. I mean, there are just so many levels of injustice, and it's still affecting people's lives today. I mean, those buildings were blown up. That should not have happened. They blew up the Twin Towers with people inside, and they experienced suffering beyond any hell that we could thankfully never imagine. They, you know, all these first responders were killed and sickened for decades. You know, there are still plenty, I'm sure, sitting home on oxygen right now, suffering with this horrible illness that is so unique because of its unique mechanism of exactly how it sickened people. I mean, there's just something about an injustice of this caliber that doesn't go away for me. I can't imagine the suffering of those who, you know, lost family members and who have just been trying to get the word out. You know, like I think about the McIlvaines. You mentioned something earlier, and I was thinking about that. And we even have a lot of information on how that poor young man was killed in the North Tower, and it all points again to the evidence of controlled demolition and explosives there. And still, it feels like people just won't listen or won't look at it. So what keeps me going is, you know, I'm not as much of an eternal optimist as you, unfortunately. So sometimes you know, if I'm going to do something for the cause, I have to go in it saying, you know, even if this doesn't amount to anything, for me, it's important to me that I know that I tried. And there's something about the very struggle that is worthwhile. If it was my family member in there, I can't imagine being able to want to carry on with this kind of thing. And I don't know. There's something about it that I feel like if no one else speaks out about this, like who will? You know, thank God there are like good people like you and the rest of AE. And I mean, there are other folks in the movement that have done a lot of good work, written amazing books, spoken out. I just felt like with everything I knew about it and everything I felt about 9/11 in New York, it just hasn't been something that's left me. So I don't have a good explanation of of why. But the tragedy and the injustice of the tragedy is, I would say, the main thing.
Right. It's persistent. And who speaks for the dead? Well, we do here in the 9/11 Truth Movement at AE 9/11 Truth at Unthinkable. And I'm going to tell you, folks, now Julia doesn't do it on a regular schedule like I do here on Freefall. But when she has a new interview up, I'm going to post it up at 911freefall.com with her permission, of course, I hope, and give some exposure there. But if people want to go back into your archives and whatnot, do you know the search term? Because I know YouTube is censoring a lot of stuff, and it's almost like you're playing a video game just to try to find the video you want. Just, how do you type it in the correct way? Do you know how people can find that properly with the right search terms?
I checked earlier. So if you go to YouTube and you want to search, if you just type in unthinkable truth in the search terms, it's usually the second or third video, even on their current algorithm. And the video just says, "This is the unthinkable truth." And so you could also just type that in, and then you'll see like a thumbnail of the tower collapsing. Just a short video. Just, I don't know. I felt inspired to make it, and it kind of sums up, I guess, my initial personal thoughts about it.
Yeah, it's a very excellent video. I've seen it a bunch of times. I've showed it around at AE 9/11 Truth as well, the people there. And I'm also going to be linking to the Unthinkable YouTube page in this show description, and we might even put a link up on the Freefall site too, so people can get to it a little bit more easily than typing in all of those things on the search box, because YouTube doesn't seem to want to help us for some reason.
No, it does.
A lot of I don't know what's going on there. But yeah, but no, we got to do our own publicity, and we got to do our own advertising, all that stuff, and help each other out. So Julia, great work on the videos, great work on the latest video, the voiceover. Thank you for volunteering with us now. And thank you for coming on 9/11 Freefall today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure. And thank you for everything you do, Andy. You do a great job.